Welcome to the wild, wild west of adulting with your co-hosts, Yeti Essien and Christina Farinacci Roberts. Today's episode is called What Are You Waiting For? Okay, let that marinate a little bit. What are you waiting for? And it's all about procrastination, okay? Because some of you perhaps procrastinated on your emergency preparedness planning and you're coming up a few squares short on the toilet paper, okay? Now, some of you might have thought, well, it doesn't matter if the tax deadline is extended because I'll probably be still doing it the day before the deadline anyway. And so hats off to you for being.
That may or may not be me.
Don't implicate yourself now. And, some of you back in the days when we were just, frequently traveling, might have procrastinated on leaving your house to get to the airport. That's definitely me.
Oh my gosh, and Yeti is the worst.
I was terrible. I really just don't like waiting. So it became this sort of adrenaline rush. You know what I'm saying? We all get our jollies somehow. And it was like, how close can I cut it, to make it through the airport? I actually had timed out the time in between the terminals. Once it got really close, flying from JFK to San Francisco, I got to the airport 15 minutes before departure, and the doors closed 10 minutes before departure. After a very vigorous pat down, I was able to.
Wait, can we add in that? And Yeti is also somebody who often brings like packages of food on her journey, which makes it all very precarious, and the TSA is all over her.
Well, that's actually why I had the pat down, because I had protein bars. I had, I just have a lot of,
No, wait, though. It's not just like packaged protein bars. She will bring like actual containers of food, like actual produce. I mean, she gets really creative.
You have your wellness goals. I have mine. Okay. You got to prepare for anything. Okay. So that's the whole point of this is, how do you sort of anticipate some of those shifts? How do you proactively manage your time so that you can keep moving forward along with your goals? And I know this is an unsettling time for everyone. So what are you hearing out there? What are you seeing in the feeds, Christina, in terms of how people are managing this time?
Well, I had a new Instagram follower, so I was checking out her page, and I don't even know if it was like immediately. It was within her last 5 posts. She talked about, she's a new mom, and she was asking people like, if you've noticed that you've changed when you've become a mother, or if you aren't a mother yet, do you anticipate changing? And she was kind of saying how in some ways she feels way more organized, and in other ways she feels like she's really struggling with procrastination. I was thinking about it, and I was like, well, yeah, I mean, when you're a new parent, you have this little tiny human that you have to take care of. And so their whole existence and livelihood is based on you addressing their needs. So I think probably what she's struggling with is she has this very real practical thing that she needs to take care of. And she also mentioned that she is like an aspiring blogger. And so she's struggling to find the time to do that. And I think it's because creativity kind of feels like more of a luxury item to her right now. And so it made me think, she was asking for tips on like, how do you all address procrastination? And I feel like it's a great question, but the question that it digs at more so is, what is the root of your procrastination? So sometimes we have procrastination out of fear. We're afraid of what will happen or what will not happen if we take a certain course of action, and that can lead to almost like an analysis paralysis. Whereas other times our procrastination might be based more in a perfectionism, where you're like waiting for this perfect moment, like whether it's to, start your grad school application, or whether it's to start trying to have children. We think we need to have certain things in place and everything has to be perfect, when the reality is it's never a perfect time. There's never actually a better time than right now to kind of do something. So I don't know. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Am I just rambling? Am I making sense?
No, it does make sense to me, but I think there's two things going on. So you talk about giving life and sustaining life. So obviously
Mm.
she has this newborn child. She's trying to sustain that life. But she also, you talked about her wanting to start a blog. And so you're trying to give life to that new pursuit. So whether it's writing a book, whether it is um, starting that side hustle, there may be something that you're waiting on because you're more focused on, right, that fight or flight, that survival instinct kicks in. And so we don't often have the bandwidth. I think it's really emotional bandwidth to sort of juggle all those different things at the same time when we're feeling sort of under the crunch to just survive, right? So it's not just how are we surviving, but how are we thriving, especially during periods of uncertainty. I think that's something that we all struggle with. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, also, I kind of think back to college, the beginning of college, and actually the end of college for me. So, as a high schooler, your life is pretty much scheduled for you. You go to school, your classes have a certain rhythm to them. You have certain after school activities that happen. You come home, you do your homework, maybe you have a part-time job. But you have to be in bed by a certain time because your parents are regulating certain things. And then all of a sudden you go to college and you have all of this unstructured time, you have all of this freedom and flexibility. Instead of you going to class from like 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, now your classes are a bit more sporadic, they're spread apart. You're responsible for a lot of the reading on your own, doing the assignments and all of that stuff. And I think sometimes when you have all of this time and you don't have something structuring you externally, it can be really hard to internally structure that. Versus towards the end of my senior year, towards the end of my college career, when I'm in my senior year, I had 2 part-time jobs that equaled a full-time job. Plus I was in school full-time. So I kind of feel like in that context, I didn't have the luxury to kind of lollygag. I was super focused. I was super organized because I wouldn't have survived otherwise. And so sometimes being super busy or having a lot of balls that you're juggling or a lot of responsibilities that you have to tend to can actually force you out of that procrastination, because I am naturally a procrastinator by I don't know if it's nature or nurture, because my dad is that tax person who is waiting until 11:59 p.m. to file for his extension. So it's like, I don't know if it's in my genetic makeup and or watching it in real life that kind of made me be like that. But I think we have talked about the fact that we sort of thrive under pressure when we put ourselves in these positions where we procrastinated to the last minute, and then we have to really put our, focus ourselves and just produce. And then if you actually succeed when you do that, then it's kind of creates this vicious cycle where you're like, but I can procrastinate and still come out on top or whatever. But it's not a good look. It's not healthy. It's not constructive.
It's not a good look for anybody. And my mom used to say, she had this expression, if you want something done, give it to the busy person, right? There's this idea that the person who's juggling a lot of balls in the air actually is a more efficient juggler because they're used to a lot of increased demands on their time, and they're better able to prioritize and focus their energies on a particular task. And so I really saw this play out when I was in business school, because we had to do, we had study buddies, and we would have study groups in different classes. And you might think, well, wouldn't this paper get written more quickly if just one person was writing it? But it was all about teamwork and learning to work with different leadership styles and personalities. And so you could tell a difference when you were in a study group with a full-time student versus a part-time student. A lot of the part-time students had full-time jobs. They had lives outside of, both school and work. And so when we were in teams together, working on a particular project, they were much more laser focused on, okay, getting in, getting out, what's everybody's responsibilities, and really marching towards the deadline, versus some of the full-time students who had more flexibility in their schedule. They might have had open afternoons or open evenings. We could be working until 1 a.m. because we could, right? Because we had that luxury of time. And so I think that, getting more familiar with, figuring out, okay, what are my priorities? Where do I want to focus my energy? And then prioritizing that time is key. to being able to push through some of those seasons. But I think a lot of people find themselves in both of those camps right now. There's some people who suddenly find themselves with a lot of open time on their hands, whether they had, a business that was largely in person, and so that activity is sort of drying up, so to speak, or they were in grad school, right, and they suddenly find themselves home with relatively short order. And so it's thinking about, what do I do with this time, this moment of pause, this space in between where I am and where I want to be, right? It opens up almost a paradox of choice, right? I think sometimes when you have narrow focus and narrow choice, it's easier to say path A or path B. But when you have the open road ahead of you, this is a virtual road trip we've been on, sometimes it's hard to figure out really what route do I take when it feels a little bit like choose your own adventure. So there's a little bit of that paradox of choice. On the other hand, we have folks who suddenly find themselves with a lot of increased load and responsibility because they are juggling working from home with a full-time job and increased responsibilities in the household with maybe homeschooling children or other tasks that need to be done around the house because it is such a chaotic time. And they're trying to figure out, how do I fit time for me in here to take pause, to breathe, and to focus efforts to say, okay, what's my next move? And so we have a little bit of both of that going on right now.
Yeah, I think that, so when I responded, because she did ask in this post for some feedback, so I kind of made a joke about how, I am a master procrastinator, but in a former life, when I was a high school principal, I had to be super proactive and I had to be really organized. One of the practical things that I had was those, I don't know if you've seen those 4 quadrants of, like, I don't know if they call it how you use your time or something, but essentially there's four quadrants, 4 boxes, 4 buckets, however you want to put it. And you have high importance, high urgency. You have high importance, low urgency. You have low importance, high urgency, and then you have low importance, low urgency. So basically, you want to be designing your life so that the majority of your time is in the low urgency, high importance. High importance, high urgency, these are the things like when it becomes the deadline for the taxes, oftentimes we could have done something to address that so that it wouldn't be in that bucket. But sometimes it's also things that are out of your control. So there's always to some extent going to be some high importance, high urgency things. Like if all of a sudden your kid breaks their leg at soccer, I mean, you can't plan for that. You just have to deal with it. That becomes the priority. But the tax thing is something that you could work around. And so figuring out what it is in your current life and which bucket does it go in. FYI, the low importance, low urgency, those are all your time suckers. Those are like, when you're scrolling through Facebook or binge watching Netflix. Not saying that scrolling and binge watching don't have their place, but if it becomes too much a part of your routine, that is an easy place that you can eliminate. But the idea is thinking about what it is that you need to accomplish, what it is that you need to achieve, and putting them in those different buckets. And then, okay, it's great to have that framework, but then you actually have to be able to do something with it. So I also made the suggestion of this concept of chunking your time. And I've often heard of it be described as it's like basically like adult school or grown-up school for yourself that you're self-imposing. So when we used to go to school, we'd have 8 periods in a day. You start off the day, you're doing math. You're doing math for 45 minutes or an hour, however long your school's schedule was. And then the bell rings, and then you put your math book away, you head on over to your history class, and then you're working on history for the remainder of that period. And so as adults, what we can do is we can create our schedule for the week and create little chunks that, maybe for these 2 hours, I'm going to be working on a project that I have for my actual, 9 to 5. And then maybe I'm going to break it up for 15 minutes. I'm going to go for a walk just so I can clear my head, get my blood circulating, because it's really important to actually have some movement and not just sit in front and stare at a screen for 8 hours, because you do have the law of diminishing returns, which I know you can get into later. But and then, maybe for another hour, you are working on the first chapter of that book you always wanted to write, or Maybe you are doing something with your child for, you're going to read a story. So it's a downtime for him, downtime for you. But this idea of breaking your day up and having certain things that you can work on, and it can actually increase the productivity by allowing you to know you have this finite period of time to work on this thing. And then you're just going to put it away. And the next day you'll do it again. So what it does is it allows you to have consistency. So you're still going to see advancement, but you're not getting so bogged down or losing momentum because you've lost steam. Is this resonating at all?
It's resonating because I think, you talk about chunking, right? And writing a book, for example, feels like an overwhelming and daunting task, right? So it seems like, why start now if there's going to be a better time down the road to sort of fit this in. But I think to your point, there is no perfect season. And so breaking down, as a former strategist, it would be these really large, lofty initiatives that, we'd be planning out. And part of it was to take the complex and break it down into step-by-step tasks or activities that you could accomplish to get closer to the goal. And so if you're taking a book, for example, maybe it's just writing the outline for the book, or as you said, starting a chapter this month or this week, writing out the first few paragraphs. And I think some of that really does help you to spark energy where there might have been this feeling of inertia. I think there's a little bit of that analysis paralysis when you're overwhelmed with choices and options and trying to figure out, or feeling like your options are limited and you're not sure which step to take. And so trying to take what seems complex, big, challenging, meaty problems that you're trying to solve for and break it down into bite-sized things that you can reasonably achieve. They're called SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound are the ways to sort of define out those goals. But I think that from a procrastination perspective, sometimes people procrastinate because they're not sure they can achieve it. But if you really break it down, could be writing a book, could be weight loss, right? And so thinking about something that feels overwhelming, that feels daunting, what can I tackle today? So we'd love to hear from you. What have you been waiting on? This week, what is something that you can commit to moving forward on? So share in the comments. Let us know what you're thinking about, what you've been holding back on, and what you'd like to proceed forward on. We would love to hear from you. Hope you're subscribing if you're enjoying what you're hearing about, and would love to get feedback from all of you out there who are sort of navigating this uncertain terrain along with us.
Does that mean we're ready for closeout karaoke?
Well, hey, no time like the present.
All right, let me see. Let's cue us up.
I want to set up the song we're doing today.
It's an oldie but a goodie.
We love the classics.
And just really quick side note, Yeti and I used to go to a weekly karaoke at, of all places, the Applebee's on DeKalb Ave in Brooklyn. You would never know how amazing the talent and sometimes the not so talented were, but this is bringing me back to that time and place.
This was her class. What she's trying to say is this was her go-to karaoke standard. Okay.
Wait. Okay. Ready? Hold on. Yes, this was our jam.
I took for granted all the times that I thought would last somehow.
I hear the laughter and I taste the tears, but I can't get near you now.
Oh, can't you see it, baby?
Got me going crazy.
Wherever you go, whatever you do, I will be right here waiting for you.
Whatever it takes, or how my heart breaks, I will be right here waiting.
says everything on your to-do list.
Yep, your to-do list will be right there waiting for you. Okay?
Well, thanks for joining us today. We know there's a lot going on, and we appreciate you spending time with us, and we hope you have a beautiful day. Until next time. Ciao.
Yes.